If you want to put on the music while people are coming in, go for it.
בקרוב תזרח השמש, נדע ימים יפים מאלה, הלב נלחם בדאגות. כולם יחזרו הביתה, נחכה להם למטה, הלוואי נדע בשורות טובות. כי עם הנצח לעולם לא מפחד, אפילו כשקשה לראות. כולם ביחד, אף אחד פה לא בודד, שישרפו המלחמות. עם ישראל חי, אם לא נשכח תמיד להיות מאוחדים.
You say something?
Yeah, your name. I didn't notice you were there. Yeah, so who came to feed us? Well, what happened to you in the Holocaust, Bruce?
What happened to the Holocaust movement?
He says, who could defeat us? The God is with us. I said, what happened in the Holocaust?
That's right.
Look, English. That's beautiful.
Good.
ארצי נחלתנו, לא תיפול כעת רוחנו, מסביב ברזל של
Yes,
חרב.
we're all around us, the iron of swords.
ויונה טיפות כנפיים, התקווה בת שנות 2000, עוד נצא לשיר ברחובות. כי עם הנצח לעולם לא מפחד, אפילו כשקשה לראות. כולם ביחד, אף אחד פה לא בודד, שישרפו המלחמות. עם ישראל חי, אם לא נשכח תמיד להיות מאוחדים. עם ישראל חי,
We have no other land.
That's true. And all the surrounding Arab countries, a shitload of them, they have states represented.
Hi.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
We're so glad to see you, and I'm especially thankful to Cantor Oringel who had this idea for tonight's Zoom, because as we've both been getting back from Israel, everybody of course is like, how was your trip? And we're having coffee with people, and we can't have coffee with everyone in time to keep the memories fresh. And so we are hoping that over the next hour we can share a slice of each of the experiences that we had and get to have a little bit of conversation. So as I was saying, you're welcome to have your video off if you're more comfortable, though we're happy to see your faces. And you can also put it on speaker mode, which allows you to see whoever's speaking biggest. We might be sharing a few pictures or video clips, so I think that will naturally happen. It's been a while since we've lived on Zoom, but in this case, it seemed like the way to go. So our plan is, Cantor and I are going to sort of moderate a little conversation between us for a few minutes to get to share with all of you a little bit about each of our respective trips and some of our impressions from Israel last month. And then we'll open it up for a little bit of Q&A and conversation, you know, whatever threads you want to follow up on, whatever's top of mind right now. Sound good? Thumbs up? Awesome. And I encourage you to keep yourself on mute until the Q&A part, especially if you've got background noise going on. But I think the Cantor has the power to forcibly mute you as needed too. So I want to start, Cantor Oringel, with you. Tell us a little bit about the Cantor's trip that you were just on, a couple of standout moments for you and what you were doing there.
So the ACC, the American Conference of Cantors, my professional organization, was always planning its trip to its convention in Israel this summer. And then everything changed on October 7th and it shifted to a mission. And the opportunity to be in Israel with 60 of my colleagues, 60, 2 buses, was extraordinary. This was my first trip going since then, and for many of the people that were on this trip. So it was a really interesting combination of many of the things that a number of you did when you went for 4 or 5 days, combined with a chance to really meet with musicians and artists and graffiti artists and music schools and film schools, all of these cultural arts centers within Israel. And it was all of those things, as well as hearing story after story after story. I went for a couple days right before with my roommate from when I lived in Israel 20 years ago. We reunited, and as we were planning the trip, what seemed really strange was I wanted to stay in a hotel with a pool, and taking a step back and realizing, well, that's really odd to be thinking about a pool while I'm going to Israel right now, a country that is at war. So keep that thread. We ended up picking a hotel with a pool, and we arrived at night. That landing in Israel, for any of you that have landed in Israel, the wheels hit the ground and suddenly you just feel at home. There's something that clicks on, that reconnects. Only this time when you get off the plane and you walk down that corridor that's so iconic, it's filled with the pictures of hostages. And that is everywhere. It's everywhere that you look. It is a continuous pulse throughout all of the experiences that we had in Israel. So we get up the first morning. We're so excited to be there. We go down for Israeli breakfast, which if any of you have been there, it's always a highlight. Now, breakfast was not in a beautiful restaurant. It was in a conference room of the conference center because they needed a bigger space for breakfast. And we walk in. We pile our plates full of all of the Israeli goodness, delicious things, cheeses and breads and everything you want. And the people around us are filling Tupperwares with food. And initially I go, oh gosh, leave it to the Jews to bring Tupperwares even to breakfast at the hotel. But wait a second. The people we were eating breakfast with were not that stereotype of, trying to be thrifty. These were displaced people. And it hit home who we were lodging with, that we were entering their temporary home as much as we were staying in a hotel. And that was, that really hit home of what it means to go to a hotel where you're thinking about the pool. And actually, when you go to the pool, you're there with families that are not there on holiday, but are there trying to keep busy their kids and find some relief in the midst of being displaced from their homes, whether in the north or the south, for the upwards of 10 months. That was an eye-opener. And as the day went on, we started talking to people. People wanted to talk. Shop owners, in the jewelry stores and the art stores. If you get into a conversation with someone for just the briefest of time, you learn their story. And that was unexpected, how openly people were sharing and how connected they automatically felt to us as Americans, as diaspora Jews. The term brothers and sisters kept coming to mind. As an only child, I've always had a hard time with that terminology. And I get it now. It made sense. It hit home. These are our brothers and our sisters. The trip started a couple days later. All of the cantors started to gather. It was an incredible program that was put together for us. It was a combination of listening and then also doing. So one of the doing pieces was we went to different places to almost be a bit of a representative. I was saying to Rabbi Frankel, you'll see a little later some videos, places wanted pictures of us visiting their organizations, I think almost as a PR tool, that it's okay to come, whatever the reason was, it was something I hadn't experienced quite so much. We would always take pictures when we would go do something good or mitzvah or something, but it wasn't the organization doing it so that they can push it out necessarily to all of their people. So one of the places that really stood out was, I'm going to hold on to that story. We did so many things. I'm trying to organize my thoughts. Among the many things that we did, we went to the Gaza envelope, and the opportunity to see, to witness, and to walk amongst what is left of different kibbutzim. A number of months ago in October, I know I was with a couple of you in Poland and Prague, and is going to Kfar Aza and Be'eri and these kibbutzim like going to a concentration camp? And the answer is no. These were war zones. These were places that experienced tragedy, and the remnants of it are visible. The pain and the death of it is palpable. Had the privilege, I don't know if it's a privilege, I don't know what word to use.
Honor.
I think honor is in there. I think it's a lot of words. Trying to find the words obviously is a challenge when you're trying to describe something like this. But the only way to go to Kfar Aza, which is one of the kibbutzim, is to know someone there. And we had incredible tour agents that got these connections for us, and we were able to walk in Kfar Aza. We walked in Kfar Aza with Shachar, and I'm going to show you a picture that in so many ways, I don't, so take a moment and for what you see, what the echoes are. So Shachar was there on October 7th. He's lived in Kfar Aza for his whole life. He started this kibbutz. There are 1,200 people on this kibbutz, and a number of months ago, he said, I'm going home. I'm going back to Kfar Aza. I'm going back to a place that has bullet holes in walls, that has burned buildings, but that is his home. And now he shares his story, and he lives there with 12 other kibbutzniks. When he went back, the army said, you can't go back here. You can't live here. And he said, just go ahead and try and stop me. This is my home. The only time he leaves the kibbutz now is to go for therapy. Shachar, while you can't tell from the size of his arm, is about a 6'5" big guy maybe in his 60s. And the openness in which he talks about getting mental health help is something that I hadn't expected. And it's something that everyone talks about. People are openly sharing the importance of mental health in this moment. When we look at our own system and kind of lament that mental health is not a priority, Israel has made it a priority. And that's really important to see, and will be an important step for ... healing, maybe living. So back in November, Rabbi Frankel and I led a service at LT where there were pictures of the hostages on the chairs. And at the end, we said, take one home, and please, God, you should be able to rip it up. And some of those have been able to, but that day I took the picture of Doron Steinbrecher. And this 30-something blonde, beautiful woman has been staring back at me every morning when I get to my office. And we're walking around Kfar Aza, and we're seeing the brokenness, the utter shatteredness of homes, and hearing stories. And when we walk past her house, and at that moment, I was it was yet another moment where the realness of it really hit home. Now, I can't share this story more publicly, and I'm not going to share her picture, because there's an area of kibbutz, Kfar Aza, where all of the hostages were living, because that's where young people lived. And it's an area where no pictures are allowed, because the terrorists were terrorizing the hostages, showing them pictures of people at their house. So they don't allow pictures anymore, because it's one more way for monsters to terrorize these hostages. That was a really tough day. At the end of it, we went to a army base, and we served dinner, all meat, all barbecue, everything that 20-somethings can pile on their plate high and chow down. And being with them, the song that I was playing when we first came on was one of the songs that played on the loudspeaker while we were there. And Am Yisrael Chai is the refrain that keeps coming back and back and back. These are young men and women who are protecting and fighting. And it was such an honor to spend an evening with them after the day that we had had. There's a lot more, but I want to turn it to Rabbi Frankel, because your experience, I think, is kind of a mashup of what you did back in February, and this trip was, what do you call it? Summer camp for rabbis. So tell us a little bit about what you experienced.
Yeah. And I just have to say, I think, Lynn is on the call. I'm looking around. Was there anyone else? Those of us who were in Israel in February on our solidarity mission, I think, got to experience some of the intensity that the Cantor did, going to Nova, et cetera. This was, for me, a very different trip from that. And I can share a little bit later about shifts I've seen in Israeli society. But just first, what was I doing there? Because I didn't have the heavy burdens of some of what the Cantor was witnessing. I got to go, as I like to call it, to Rabbi Summer Camp in Jerusalem, where I was studying at the Shalom Hartman Institute, which I'll just share a couple of pictures for those who aren't familiar. Hopefully you can see that. So this is the oasis in Jerusalem that I have studied at now 4 different summers over the course of my rabbinate. It is a pluralistic house of study, a think tank, a center for Israeli and also world Jewish leadership. And every July, they bring together rabbis from across the world and across the denominational spectrum. This summer, it was 200 rabbis, mostly from North America, but also Israeli rabbis, some European, some from South America. And we spend 10 intense days studying on this magical campus. You can see it's Jerusalem stone all around us. Just to give you a little sense of what we were doing, this is the campus at night, and you can see on the left side, we were listening to Daniel Hartman. For those who, this is him over here. I don't know if you can see my cursor. The son of the late Rabbi David Hartman, who founded the Institute. Daniel is the leader of the Hartman Institute now. He's in conversation this particular evening with Yossi Klein Halevi, Israeli thinker and writer. You might have read some of his books. And we got to be there as they recorded a live podcast and then did Q&A with the rabbis. Can't recommend enough some of the Hartman podcasts, which I can share more about later. So basically, and then the door behind them, which is the door to the right, leads to an amazing Beit Midrash, a huge room walled with books all around where we would do much of our learning. We were every morning taught by different scholars and thought leaders. So on the top right, you've got Daniel Hartman there again. To his left, a guy named Tal Becker, who has been an ambassador for Israel. He was actually one of the guys at the UN defending Israel at The Hague when they were recently accused of genocide. He also was one of the architects of the Abraham Accords, major player, and a faculty member at Hartman. On the bottom left, you can see Rabbi Sharon Brous, who's going to be our scholar in residence, talking about her recent book, The Amen Effect, along with a colleague. And it was also just a great chance to get to be with other rabbis. In the middle on the bottom there, Dr. Andrew Rayfeld, who's not a rabbi, but the leader of HUC, the president. And to the right there, Josh Weinberg, one of the URJ presidents, as well as Orly is the head of the RAC in Israel. So it was learning and networking, big picture questions and thinking all together, and then hours of sort of text study interspersed. And then finally, a little bit of just getting to dip out into Israeli society. Unlike the Cantor, I was not getting on and off a bus every day and racing all around, so much so that even though we were just a couple blocks apart for my first and her last 2 days, we couldn't even catch a moment to see each other because she was so busy and jam-packed. I had a different experience. I was renting an apartment with a dear friend, also my roommate from Israel back in the day. And basically mostly settled in Jerusalem, except for a couple days in Tel Aviv. And one day of breaking from our usual studies, which was thinking about questions of Zionism and this moment and the ethics of war, we had a trip day, not a trip week. Having been already down to the Gaza envelope in February, I opted for something different, and I got to check out the newest gem in the kind of crown of Jerusalem, where the Knesset building and the Israel Museum are located, is now the new National Library. I must put on everyone's to-do list when you get back to Israel to have a tour. You can see the architecture is breathtaking and filled with all kinds of symbolic meaning. You can see the main reading room there, which kind of spirals like a well of knowledge. On the bottom right is their rare book room. I got to see Haggadahs and tractates of Talmud from hundreds of years ago, really cool stuff. And so in a way, I was immersed just as the Cantor in this sort of post-October 7th reality, but also was in a different way, had a chance to just be in Israel. Oh, here was one more. So I got to, you know, for those of you who can recognize the top left, anyone know what that top left picture is? I was told there would be no quiz, I know. This is the King David Hotel. You can see the YMCA tower kind of on the side. I got to spend time in the Shuk in Tel Aviv on the bottom left. I just happened to be hanging out one night at the end of my trip, and somebody proposed, just, you know, an Israeli proposed to another. And we got to capture and witness that, meeting falafel. I also had a great evening trying out about 50 shofars on a Ben Yehuda shop so that I could choose 10 to bring back to the congregation for our growing shofar corps. So I had a lot of lighter moments too in Israel, even as the atmosphere was overall heavy. And that was, I don't know, a little bit about my trip. I know I'm gonna unshare. Hold on. Wait, now I'm going too far. So Cantor, you started to talk about some of the powerful experiences you had with individual Israelis. Are there a couple of conversations, a couple of interactions that really capture what this moment is over there?
Absolutely. One is kind of indicative of this randomness of getting into conversations with someone. I mentioned the pool. On the way to the pool, because we went to such effort to get a pool, where you get your towel for the pool. The gentleman that was giving us the towel ended up not just being the person giving us our towel, but we spent 25 minutes hearing his story and where he was on October 7th and where he went to university in the States and the challenges that he's having about raising his family now in Israel and his dream of moving to Michigan with his family. But right now, he's been on Miluim, which on reserves, for 6 of the last 9 months, and the hardship of this life that he is living and the challenges of it. And the honesty of the conversation is what I'm talking about, this openness to share and talk. The other story I'll tell you is one that happened at the Sheba Medical Center. So it's a rehabilitation hospital, and it has been doing a lot of wounded warriors. Or bringing wounded warriors to health, bringing hostages to health, bringing all of Israeli society to a place of health. And we got to meet David. And David, on October 7th, was at Simchat Torah services, at Shabbat morning services. And he got a call from his commander, and he didn't answer because he thought it was a mistake. Commander called back. He knew something was wrong. And he is a part of a unit, kind of like a Navy SEAL. Within hours, he was dropped by helicopter at Kibbutz Be'eri, where he fought and was part of the brigade that took that kibbutz back. When you're down there, and I'm sure, I imagine you saw that in February, the size of the area that was overtaken on October 7th is, it's shocking that 17 miles from the border in Ofakim, there were Hamas fighters. It until you're driving the roads, it didn't sink in. So when we hear, and we heard a lot of stories and frustration about where was the army? Where was the army? Why did it take so long? And the reality is Hamas was very, very well planned. They decimated the Southern forces in an hour. That the entire rest of the country had to mobilize to get there. And within, I don't know the exact time they were there, but this is the story of David, who was there and who walked into homes to find bowls of cereal with families at them. Things that no human should ever have to see. He saw the worst of it. And he fought, and he was part of the brigade that took it back. And in the process, he got shot. And he was in his unit, the medic. So when he realized where he was shot, at a place very close to an artery, he tried to put the tourniquet on himself and was not able to. And because he was the medic, he was the one, he resolved that this was it. And he said Vidui, and he said Shema, and he blessed his family. And by miracle, by whatever you believe in. They had no way out because they were dropped in by helicopter. They were short on water, and for whatever reason, somebody, one of these brave Israelis who were who kind of, a random fighter, came in with a truck, and they loaded the truck with their wounded brethren, and he ended up in a hospital, and he is now telling his story. He is not recovered, though he's on the road to recovery, but it's 10 months later, and it's been a lot of challenges. When you call him a hero, his response is, "My wife is the hero, taking care of my 6 kids while I sit here." And he said every time he tells his story, 1/60th of his pain goes away. He's already been on a tour to the US to tell his story, and he keeps meeting with multiple groups a day because he wants his story to be the story that people tell, that they don't say, well, a friend of a friend heard a story. He wants 1 degree of separation between, I'm telling you David's story, I now am telling you David's story. So as Cantors would do, we asked honest questions about the healing process, and he talked about the power of music. He said there are 2 things in his room at home, in 2 corners, neither of which he can bring himself to touch since October 7th. In one corner is a Gemara turned to the Daf Yomi of October 7th, which means he was studying Talmud every day with a larger worldwide group of people. He hasn't studied since then. In the other corner is what he called a crappy guitar. So the many cantors in the room, antenna went up, and, how do you help a person like this? We will listen to your story. We will tell your story. But being the people that we are, we mobilized after we said goodbye to him. And that night, I went back with the COO of our organization because we had bought him this. So instead of a crappy guitar, he's got a really good guitar. And when you give an instrumentalist their instrument, their body kind of fits into the position. And remember, I said he hasn't touched his guitar. He went to strum as if that's what you do, but he held himself back because he said he's not ready to play. He wants to play when he's healed. And I look forward to the day when he sends us a video, and I pray that it's soon, of him playing the guitar. Because I know that it will call to him. And instead of his guitar being connected to bad memories, he has a new instrument to sing new songs and to be a new beginning for him. People want to share, and being there meant we could listen. I have never in my life felt my presence to be so purposeful, that merely being was all that people needed. It was a gift to be there. It was an honor. It was challenging. And I want to say, Rabbi Frankel mentioned the good Israeli moments. It was not all sadness. It was not all tears. There was joy. There was a lot of music. And each person just genuinely shared their gratitude for being there, which is a side of Israel I've not seen before. I'm so curious, Rabbi Frankel, you have this interesting kind of dual vision of Israel on the ground. And I'm curious, from February to now, what have you noticed? What changed? What's improved, maybe, I hope? I'm really curious.
In some ways. So yeah, so much of what the Cantor is sharing, I feel like that was my February trip. And then stepping back off the plane this time, initially felt like a seamless extension of just having been there, and then quickly felt different. And some of the tension you'll hear between our experiences is, I think, a living tension in Israeli society, right? For many people, especially if they have a connection directly to a hostage, to a soldier, to somebody who's been displaced, they're like trapped forever in October 7th, right? They are still in trauma. And the country has moved forward in certain ways. I was in downtown Ben Yehuda Street, and it was hopping with young people on a Thursday night at the beginning of the weekend. And the beaches in Tel Aviv are full again. And there's this sort of a bit of cognitive dissonance, honestly, between the horrors of what are going on, first of all, in Gaza itself and around the borders, and then a country that is trying to live still. And that was definitely a drumbeat that I heard, especially from my own relatives, who said to me a couple of times, you don't have to feel guilty. You're allowed to have fun. You should enjoy. We have to live. You have to live, right? It can't all be the heaviness. And yet, I'll share a few photos. This was constant tension, because wherever you walk around, these are just some snapshots of the streets in Jerusalem, not far from Hartman. Everywhere still are the hostage photos. On the top left, it says Shiva October, the 7th of October, but it's a double entendre in Hebrew, because Shiva is 7, but it's also Shiva, right? The country has like been in Shiva since the 7th of October. On the bottom left is outside the Prime Minister's residence, where there are ongoing protests and presence from hostage families in particular. And on the bottom right, I guess it's sort of hard to see the Hebrew, but maybe you can see the icon, the sort of broken flag as time that's running out. There is a sense, very differently, I think, now than back in February, that the war isn't working, that I'll just go to the next slide. If you look at the top right, all over Israel are these signs that say, Biyachad ninatzeach, together we will win. And people are starting to ask the question over these last few months, as I think we are as American Jews, what does winning mean anymore? Is there even a possibility of completely rooting out Hamas? Is winning getting the hostages back? What does it mean to secure Israeli society again? On the very left, the Cantor mentioned, when you get to the airport, are all the hostage signs. When we were there in February, they were pretty much just a photo with the names. And what you can see now, coming back 5 months later, is over time it gets layered with, people's comments and memories and more pictures and stickers. And that was sort of my feeling of the whole country, that the original trauma of it all is sort of right there under the surface, but it's getting layered now and more complicated. You can see Fool Bibi, which I think was a sanitized version of another 4-letter F starting word that you can imagine, which we saw all around graffitied with Bibi. Because even more so than in February, there is pretty widespread, significant disdain for Netanyahu, for his government, a feeling of him not just having failed on October 7th, but really being the blockade now that is preventing a hostage deal, and a feeling among many Israelis, and in particular the hostage families, that he's much more concerned about his own, political survival and gain than in really getting those loved ones back. And there is really a live tension and polarization. I don't have to tell you, I'm sure you read all about it, between, the right and the left. So on the bottom right corner is a guy who was standing right by the shuk on Friday afternoon when I went to get my Shabbat challah. It says in Hebrew, Smolanim bogdim. Leftists are traitors, i.e., those who are, trying to protest the government and fighting for a ceasefire, they're the traitors from his perspective. Israeli society is really up in arms. I spent my 2 Saturday nights at protests, which felt important, right? First of all, to be able to say, I love Israel, I support Israel, I stand by Israel, I defend Israel, and once I'm inside Israel, I am still an ardent Zionist being critical of a particular government or wanting to push a different kind of democracy. So the first slide here were the protests in Jerusalem every Saturday night, mostly in Tel Aviv, but also around the country. Israelis are increasingly taking to the streets, and it's getting hotter and more divisive. In Jerusalem was definitely a smaller protest compared to Tel Aviv the next week. A lot of young people, you can see that pink sign. Some young people are holding chatufot, malakol, like hostages above everything else. You can also see that there were, policemen on horses ready to run into the crowd if needed. Likewise, literally my last hour in Tel Aviv before I went to the airport to fly out the next weekend was in Hostage Square, where I know the Cantor was as well, where every Saturday night, Israelis are gathering again to fight and advocate for the hostages, in particular, increasingly, demanding a ceasefire and demanding elections and a new government. There's all kinds of sculpture and other powerful artistic renderings, including many of you have probably seen that like long Shabbat table that got set up there. Originally sort of table all set for Shabbat with empty seats. Then it's evolved as kind of a living sculpture. And then the bottom left, when we went there that Saturday night, just a couple of weeks ago, someone had filled each place with like teddy bears for all the children. And bloody teddy bears. It's so intense. And it happened to be that Saturday night was right before Netanyahu was coming. So a lot of the speaking at the rally that night was about Israelis' feelings about Netanyahu's visit in this moment. Oh wait, I'm gonna go back. And a feeling, it seems, from many in Israel, and we can talk about, what your own reactions to Bibi's speech were, but a feeling of like, this was a publicity stunt for him, and he should be focused on what really needs to be happening. And if he doesn't announce a ceasefire on that trip, well, then we shouldn't be paying for it. A lot of anger. And then the last thing I'll just show quickly in terms of like where Israeli society is and how they're processing the trauma and the grief. I tagged on a couple of days in Tel Aviv after Hartman to see family, and I got to go to this incredible museum exhibit. It's an old rundown hotel that was taken over by artists, and the theme is like escapism, escaping this moment. And the artists took it in all different directions. Some of it was sort of, I'm sure if you were high, it was like even more interesting, but I was clearly not. All kinds of sort of psychedelic art. Each room of the hotel was an immersive experience you walked into. But a lot of it was just a response to this moment. So the top left, this like people just wanting to get out of there. The bottom left, they were really kooky. You have to imagine like walking into a room and this is what's all around you, but newspaper everywhere, right? People are inundated by the news. They cannot get away from it. On the top middle there, one artist thinking about all those displaced families that the Cantor met in the hotel, like what was it like for them to bring their entire lives into a little hotel room and try to function there with their kids? And then of course, the weapons cemetery. So I think Israelis in a lot of different ways, taking to the streets, expressing through art. Probably the most powerful experience I had was a night where I ditched the speaker at Hartman and instead went to what's called in Hebrew Shirah Tzibor, or a community sing-along in Jerusalem, in an open plaza where about 500 or 600 Israelis and tourists, people of all walks of life and religious affiliations, just got together to sing folk songs, songs of peace. And those are some of the things that I think are sustaining Israelis right now. Cantor, I'm noticing the time. I want to make sure we get to Q&A also. So do you want to say?
So
share?
I feel I would really like to show this next video.
Perfect. And then maybe we'll open up for Q&A after that.
Yeah, because I think it lays out a lot of things. So a little bit of what I'm about to show you. So this is at the Nova Festival site after walking around and experiencing it's there are in true Israeli form, there are trees for those who were killed. There are kind of each person has a picture and like a memorial, and people have added to it as the rabbi was saying, that it's this layered thing that friends have come and added their piece to each one. And when that was over, we had a ceremony to just feel all the things that you feel when you come to pray in a place like that, when you come to sing. And when people gather in those kinds of places, Lynn, I know we saw that when we were at Auschwitz this year, people join without an invitation. Prayer is an invitation for whomever is in the vicinity. And in this case, 3 soldiers joined us. And I'd like to share this video, which is as soon as the ceremony was over, one of them took the opportunity to speak to us. It's 2.5 minutes. One disclaimer, at the end, there is an explosion. It is over the border, but where the Nova Festival is, it's about 1 kilometer from Gaza. And no one in our vicinity was hurt. And what you'll hear him say, what interesting, you'll hear the Americans kind of jump. He doesn't flinch and says, that was us. And by the way, thank you, as a way of saying your government sent that warhead. And it's destroying the tunnels and the tunnel network that is just over the border. So just a heads up that there will be a loud noise towards the end of it.
Pretty great, and we came here today to see sisters. Most of us lost friends, lost family on this day, and for us to see your support, we just came here like by the way, and we saw you, and all of us came very emotional for your beautiful ceremony, and we want to thank you as Jews before we are Israelis, because for us, we always look at you like you live in a safe haven. But now we understand there is no safe haven for us, nowhere on earth. So we are for you, and who knows what the future is going to bring to you guys, but you need to stay strong abroad for yourself and for us. And we are together in the same boat, and keep strong, because we can here protect ourselves, and you know, and we see the anti-Semitism, and there is a lot going on inside the Jewish community, reforms, Orthodox, conservatives. For them, they don't give a shit about it. They don't care. For them, we are Jews. Like we are Jews for Antifa in Manhattan, and like we are Jews for the KKK in Alabama. For them, we are Jews. Like in the 40s, and like in the 30s. So we want to thank you guys that you make all the way over here. You put your life in danger.
You do.
To came here and to see what happened to us. But we are strong, and we're gonna win, and we're already winning. It's okay. It's over there. It's going over there. So, and thank you for this.
Maybe not that one. We will keep providing that.
So thank you guys. Have fun as you can. Thank you.
There's a whole thesis wrapped up in that 2.5 minute speech. let's take a moment and unmute. And the rabbi and I are happy to answer questions, keeping in mind what's clear about all of this is it's complicated. Who has a question?
Yeah, wait, Ed, you have to unmute. Ed, unmute.
Okay, so I was there for a week at the end of May and had very much the same experiences that the Cantor had, but there was one interesting coincidence that had a lot of meaning for me. We met a man who was a little younger than I am, but he was a paratrooper in 1967. Anyway, he had a son who was kidnapped, and he told us all about that. But in 1967, he was a paratrooper and part of the group that liberated Jerusalem. And I had read a wonderful documentary called They Were Dreamers. It was about the lives of 5 paratroopers who were part of this group who liberated Jerusalem. And it was written by, and I had forgotten.
Yossi Klein Halevi, who I was just studying with at Hartman.
Absolutely. I mean, what a wonderful coincidence. And Zeb had recommended the book to me maybe 5 years ago. But these things coming together like that, this man who was a paratrooper who entered Jerusalem, he didn't get a chance to have his picture taken with Moshe Dayan and all the guys against the wall because he had gotten wounded. But anyway, that was interesting. But we met women whose husbands had been murdered. There was a woman who she lived in a kibbutz. We visited kibbutz Be'eri and a number of others, but her kibbutz was a little further up the line and a lot closer, within walking distance of the beach at the Mediterranean. And on Friday morning, her husband, who liked to fish, left home, walked to the beach. Never heard again from him. And she didn't find out until a week and a half later that he was killed. So, I mean, there were all these personal experiences that were shared with us. But Israel, as I think each of you touched on, Israel has had such an amazing things to help heal. I mean, they have physical therapists. They have psychologists who have come to meet with groups to help the emotional and physical healing processes. And it was interesting that we had a tour through Kibbutz Be'eri by the brother of one of the defenders who protected. There were 6 nurses, and they sought shelter in a dentist's office, and he was sort of the lone armed defender with them, and they were able to hold until he ran out of ammunition. He was able to defend those nurses up until 15 minutes before the IDF arrived. So he and the nurses were murdered, and his brother, who hadn't been there at the time, showed us around, and so we saw exactly the same kinds of things that
there are millions of stories, right? So many amazing stories.
Yeah, amazing.
I want to make sure we do have a time if people have questions. I don't know, Ed, was there a question you were going to, or just chiming in with more amazing stories, right? Just so many.
I have a question. Being there in February and trying to think about both of your experiences now, there are similarities, and of course there are differences, but it's hard to imagine that it's still 5 months dealing with the same issues. Probably not, I imagine not the same intensity, but certainly intensity. One of the things that we were there, same thing, all of the stories and people wanted to talk. My question is, when we were there, there was the building where a lot of the families of the hostages had a an area where they met in addition to the hostage square. Is that still, are the hostage families still there?
Yeah, it's the Hostage Family Forum. It's a kind of a tall building in Tel Aviv. It was a high-tech building, I think, that got basically a chunk of it donated to help support the needs of the hostages. I don't know, Cantor, if you guys went there, but we
I
did it in
think
February.
that's where I think
It's not far from
where
Hostage Square.
story. Yeah.
And but yes, there is still sort of an ongoing rotating presence of hostage families there. It's a place where they kind of get solidarity and support from one another, where they're going because they know that any solidarity missions that come are going to go there. That's how our group, right, got to hear directly from a couple of families, including Andrei Koslov, right, one of the 4 who were rescued in that incredible operation a few months ago. Lynn and I got to meet his mom and his girlfriend back in February, and they shared his story. And then, you know, we opened the newspaper that day and it was like, oh my God, Andre was one of our hostages, right? Like the Cantor had her hostage. It is still very much active.
It is. And the other thing is, I mean, even then there was beginning to be more of an outcry toward an discontent with Netanyahu. And that's gotten better, but he is still there. And what are people saying about that? And is there a sense that he is going to be out in any time soon? How do
I mean, I could hear the lack of trust that he has the hostage interest in mind through the conversations that I had. And again, we were meeting with a certain sector of the community. I know there are other parts of Israel that feel quite differently, but there's a real lack of trust. And nobody seems to have much, he's not, there's no sense that he's going to just step down. I know there were a lot of comments, if you listen to the Times of Israel podcast, like maybe what President Biden does can, you know, inspire Bibi. But I don't see it happening. I don't see that happening.
I'll go even a step further because I have a branch of my family is in Israel, mostly living in Tel Aviv suburbs, and I spent a lot of time with them my last couple of days. And the language they use to describe how they feel, ironically, is that they feel that they are hostages of Bibi, that the country is being held hostage by this government, that Bibi is being held hostage. You know, the deal, the devil's bargain he's made with Smotrich, with Ben Gvir, that he has, again, his own interest is the most important thing. And that, listen, because of the Knesset parliamentary system and the fact that they have more than, you know, it's 120 seats in the Knesset, like the old Sanhedrin. You need 61 to have a coalition that can build a government, but they're at, I want to say 64, 65. It's like not even hanging by a thread. It will require a few of those ministers to pull out in order to topple the government. And everyone is afraid of him. He's sort of a political henchman also. And people feel like even as they take to the streets and are ardently protesting and calling for elections, that there's kind of nothing they can do, that they're stuck in this situation. Maybe there are some who are speculating that the mandatory draft of Haredim now, and the sort of hoopla with the courts may be enough to budge someone in the coalition, that maybe that will make it crumble and call for elections sooner. But in general, there's just this feeling of like we're trapped and we're stuck with this government by a lot of people.
And it's not getting any better. The decisions are getting worse.
It's not. And, you know, it's interesting, just in the last few days since Netanyahu's speech, you know, to the joint session of Congress, which I'm guessing many of you watched or read.
Awful.
Even processing with some of our own congregants, right? Like there's a variety of perspectives. There are people who thought it was brilliant and that he is indeed an incredible orator and he said all these things that the world needed to hear. There are others who, you know, come to it with the perspective that this was really all about him and a political stunt and, you know, didn't get us any closer to ending this war. I mean, it's really.
And the other piece is that what he says in English is not what he says in Hebrew, which I think is an interesting.
What's the, can you?
I can't, this again, so one of our first meetings was with the host of the Times of Israel podcast, the daily briefing. And that was one of the things that they put out there on their podcast, this idea that it's a show, that what he says in English is not what he says in Hebrew. So that's not me. That's one of the things that I'm hearing.
Well, and he's speaking to different audiences with different worldviews, right? Like one of the things that came up also a lot, both at Hartman, in our sessions with the scholars, with Yossi Klein-Halevi there, who, you know, a rabbi from North America said, Yossi, because we're talking about Zionism and what does Zionism mean in this moment? And we said, listen, there are a lot of young people in our communities, our kids, our grandkids, off on college campuses elsewhere, who are Jews, and they're calling themselves anti-Zionist or anti-Israel, which PS means different things to different people, and it's a loaded term and blah, blah, blah. But Yossi, how do we deal with them? How do we relate to them? And his and other Hartman scholars' response was kind of very dismissive, like they're out of the camp, you know, cut them off if they're anti. And we, as North American rabbis, like on the ground, we're like, no, these are our kids. We have to figure out how to stay in conversation with them. But he just couldn't, right? Just the same way when I'm talking to my cousins, and rightfully they say, you know, listen, you can't judge until it's your kid on the front line. You can't judge until you are living here. And I would say something like, but like, you have to understand, we open the New York Times every day, and what do you see on the front page are like pictures of dead Palestinian children every day, day after day. And the thing is, like, Israelis aren't seeing that. They're just not. It is not in the media there at all. It is not part of the mindset there at all. And so we are really wrestling with this stuff. It's not that they're not wrestling with moral questions there. They are.
They are.
But they are living in a different reality with a different media perspective. And there were moments I found with my own family and then with even leaders at the Hartman Institute where it's like, we have this shared fate and we're all in this together and we're interdependent. And also there's a limit to how much we can fully understand what each other are going through in this moment.
But the interesting thing there, and it kind of gets alluded to in that video that I shared, and it's one of my takeaways, that before all of this, Israel existed as its entity of Jewish life. Diaspora Judaism is its entity of Jewish life. And sometimes we wander into Israel life when we go to visit, and sometimes Israelis wander into diaspora Jewish life, but that really they were kind of two universes, equal and essential, but like not really intertwined. And I think what's become clear from October 7th on is that these universes overlap and that we are intrinsically connected in ways that we didn't realize. And I actually think, and I don't know what to do with it, that the fact that a Jewish college student has to name themselves an anti-Zionist proves the intrinsic connection of the two entities. And it's not the response we're hoping for, but if it didn't matter, if the universes didn't coalesce like this, they wouldn't need to name themselves anything. So I don't know what we do with that, but that connectedness is being felt, I think, by both us and them in new ways. And we're all trying to figure out what to do with that.
That was very strong when we were in Israel. And we heard over and over again how much these missions, and there were many, and continue to be, were so important, and how important it was for the Israeli Jews to see us from the United States and other people supporting them, and how we were one, and their hope was that if anything good came of this, that we as Jewish, both in the diaspora and in Israel, would once again be one. Very strong message.
Yeah.
So can I take it a step further and ask, how do I talk to my Gentile friends who are opening up the Times and seeing, as you said, Palestinians, they're up to 40,000, 50,000, whatever it is, and I'm sitting here going, well, Israel needs to exist. They need to defend themselves. What do I say to them to I don't know if it's to say balance it or to respond?
I think to
I
echo
said,
the Cantor, I think the most important thing is to start with what the Cantor said, which is like, this is complicated. And if it were simple, like there'd be peace in the Middle East if there were a really easy solution. And there are multiple truths here that are really at odds with each other. I think it is a truth that Israel faced on October 7th and continues to face in this moment. We're watching it on the northern border, right, percolate to existential threat. And there is a feeling that, from Israelis at least, no other country in the world would be asked to show restraint when there were constant terrorist attacks, when their civilians were being targeted. And that, of course, because of the Hamas and Hezbollah infrastructure of embedding terrorism in civil society, there will be casualties and collateral damage. And they can only do so much to avoid it. And in fact, a drumbeat I heard was like, you wouldn't believe it, the world thinks we're like committing genocide. If you're in the Israeli army, you actually feel like we're more restrained than we should possibly have to be, that our hands are like tied, that we can't freely shoot, that we take all these precautions to not. So it's like, they feel like it's upside down. That's one truth. Another truth is that there are thousands and thousands of, it depends on how you define innocent Palestinians, certainly thousands and thousands, right? But this is part of where it gets tricky. Are you a civilian if you're hiding a hostage? Are you a but the truth is, innocent people, and a child is a child, and they're being killed, and it's devastating and tragic. And many people feel there's no winning anymore. There's no way to totally root out Hamas. We've got to get to a ceasefire. We've got to end this war. We've got to stop the collateral damage. And I think the most important thing we can do is like name the multiple truths. I think where things get dangerous in all politics, I believe, is when you only can articulate or see like the one perspective. It's harder to live in the messy middle, but I think that's the reality of it.
I think one of the other pieces also is separating out the Israelis and Israel from Netanyahu.
You know what, Lynn, you make such a good point. When I got back from Israel, I was like, I blocked off in my calendar, I'm going to DC and I'm going to protest and I'm joining with my brothers and sisters. And then I came back for a week and I realized the nuance that by standing against Bibi in DC, I could be perceived as someone standing against Israel. And I wasn't willing to take the chance of looking like I was anti-Israel when I'm anti-Bibi. And Rabbi Frankel alluded to this, like, to be in Israel and protest, it's very clear what you're protesting. But then you come back here and it gets murky.
Yeah.
And that's something we talked about at Hartman too, Yossi and Danielle. Like, we talked about what are the conversations we as Jewish leaders or just Jewish Americans have, what are the conversations we have that are outward facing, and what are the conversations we'll have inside our closed circles, right? In terms of how critical we're willing to be, in terms of how far we'll go, in terms of what we'll stand against for exactly those reasons. And there's some shifting that happens. Being inside Israel allows you to, go further down some of those roads, because there's already an assumed, dedication that you're there at all.
Yeah.
Any last questions before the Cantor has a final little musical clip? If people need to slip off, we understand, but yeah, Suzanne.
I'm so glad that we got, first of all, thanks for your sharing. I haven't been and have been really curious. I'm glad we got into the sort of complexity and the nuance. I think here in the US, which is my only reference, there are things that are being conflated, and you can't be anti the government's actions and still be pro-Israel, because everything's been simplified and boiled down to sound bites. And I find that very frustrating. And I don't know if anyone was driving by on the Post Road and Orienta this afternoon, like between 5 and 7 or 6 and 7, there was a pro-Palestinian protest on the Post Road at the intersection right there where the daycare center is, and the entrance to the harbor, and the police were there, so it was planned. And there were I think maybe 25 people with a bullhorn and placards and flags and a variety of things, making a bunch of noise and not stopping traffic, but disrupting it. And what the sign said is, there's blood on IDF's hands. That was their message. And free Palestine. Those were their two sound bites. And I live a block from there, and somebody told me about it, so I walked out to go see. I wanted so much to like talk to one of them, but I don't feel like I'm equipped to do that, because I presume, perhaps incorrectly, that too many people, in my opinion, just take the sound bites. And, you know, if there was somebody in that group like me who wanted to get into the complexity and the nuance, I would have loved to have had the conversation, but they were all fired up, so I assumed not.
And it's these false binaries also,
Yeah.
right? That you can't, like, either you're pro-Israel or you're free Palestine. Well, there are a lot of us who want the Palestinians to have a state and not be
Actually,
occupied,
and would like
but
to free
not at
Palestine,
the
free Palestine from their captors, which is Hamas.
right.
Yeah.
But I was just gonna say, you know, like, not at the expense of having an Israel still, right? And it's and so yeah.
So
Ellen,
we're conscious of time.
oh wait, Ellen, can I just let Ellen do one last question, because she hasn't said anything?
Hi, I just wanted to say that on the other side, it's also conflated. The protesters are saying free Palestine, but they're not talking about Hamas. Hamas is not the Palestinians. And just as you can confuse Netanyahu with all the Israelis, shouldn't confuse the Palestinian people with this terrorist organization that's taken over their country. I think that's something that the students, at least on my campus, do not understand. I think we Jews would be much more understanding if the signs were hostile to Hamas, or rather than conflating it with the Palestinians. There's so much of that on both sides, it seems to me.
Good point.
So one of the learning sessions that I had at a day at HUC at Hebrew Union College was with Dr. Tanya Surmer, who did a whole session on the Israeli soundscape since October 7th, looking at trends on the radio. And it kind of leans into the Shira B'Tzibur that Rabbi Frankel talked about, the shift in what people are singing and what they're choosing to listen to on Spotify, is that they go back to classics. The Am Yisrael that we started with, Am Yisrael Chai, is a newer piece, and it's kind of taken off, but the vast majority, Israelis are going back to Shlomo Artzi, and they're going back to David Geffen and all of the Ofra Chaza, all of these singers that created the soundscape of Israel in previous wars. And this idea of hearkening back to earlier times, one of the messages we heard often was that this is a return to a war of independence, and that the fighters on the field will be the next generation of great Israeli leaders. So with that in mind, I close us out with two classic songs, Adon Olam by Uzi Hitman, that won the Hasidic Song Contest in 1976, and then Amen by Moshe Datz that won Eurovision in 1995. And what you'll, this is at the Rimon School of Music, which is the top school of music for everything other than classical music in Israel. And it was an extraordinary morning of music and singing. And the final piece is a combination choir of all the cantors and their a cappella group.
תן שתתקשר, אהבה
May Israel find peace soon, and may we as well.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you both.
Thanks so much. That was stupendous ending.
Thank you so much. Thank you.